Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Is China's current economic pivot from sheer manufacturing power to innovative leverage a genuine turning point fueled by inspiration, or simply a sophisticated, highly strategic reaction to American pressure?
That's really the core tension, isn't it? This interplay between, internal goals and external pressures. And what we're digging into today really highlights that. We're looking at two big shifts in China's economic thinking.
Okay, what are those?
Well, first, there's this big domestic push, this narrative around innovation and productivity, what economists call total factor productivity, or TFP.
Right, TFP, getting more out of what you already have.
Exactly. And second, there's the, let's say, more assertive side, the strategic use of economic tools, particularly things like export controls, to build leverage on the global stage.
So our aim here is to unpack both these threads. We'll look at the evidence, but also, crucially, apply some skepticism. We need to question the data, the assumptions.
Absolutely, because with an economy this significant, you need to understand if the story you're hearing is pure progress or if there's maybe some clever measurement involved too.
Okay, let's start with that inspiration piece then. Beijing's talking a lot about TFP, calling it the key to its new quality productive forces.
They are. The language is all over party media. It signals a clear policy desire to shift away from just, adding more people and more machines, basic inputs towards efficiency gains.
But here's where it gets interesting, right? This policy focus seems to get a big boost, maybe even retroactive justification, from a specific choice made in a major global data set.
Precisely. We're talking about the Penn World Table, specifically version 11.0, which came out late last year. It's a trusted source used by economists everywhere.
And what do they change? How big a deal is this switch? Does it mean the TFP numbers are just, fiddled?
It's definitely a big deal. PWT 11.0 made a key change. It now uses China's official GDP numbers. Now, this is important because previous versions, like 10.x, use adjusted figures, specifically the Madison Wu series.
Why did they use those adjusted figures before?
Well, the thinking behind the Madison Wu approach was often to rely more on physical output data, like tons of steel produced or bushels of grain. The idea was that this might be a more, let's say, grounded measure, maybe less subject to official massaging than the reported GDP figures.
Okay, so PWT switched from that more conservative physical output-based estimate to the official government number. What does that do to the TFP calculation? Maybe give us an analogy.
Sure. Think of TFP as the secret sauce in economic growth. GDP is the final dish. Labor and capital workers and machines are your known ingredients. TFP is everything else that makes the dish better without adding more ingredients, better recipes, better kitchen organization, innovation and efficiency.
Right.
So if you suddenly measure the final dish, the GDP, as being significantly bigger, but you haven't changed the amount of known ingredients, labor and capital inputs didn't suddenly surge, then mathematically your calculation of the secret sauce, the TFP, has to go up.
Ah, I see. So switching to the higher official GDP figures mechanically inflates the TFP calculation for the 2010s because TFP is just a leftover bit.
It mechanically raises that residual, yes, which makes the productivity story for that decade look quite a bit rosier in this specific data set.
That's a really critical point. It suggests maybe part of this inspiration narrative is amplified by a measurement choice. But we need to be fair, it's probably not just accounting. What are the caveats?
Exactly, and the sources are quick to point these out. First, the PWT authors acknowledge this shift to official data is mainly a pragmatic choice. It makes the data easier to align with other official stats. It's not necessarily them saying the official numbers are definitively more accurate than the old adjusted ones.
Okay, so it's usability over validated accuracy, in a sense.
You could put it that way. Second, and this is important, other major data sets, like those from the World Bank, still show a significant slowdown in China's TFP growth after the 2008 financial crisis. So this PWT 11.0 picture isn't the only story out there. The narrative depends heavily on which data you prioritize.
Right, the picture isn't uniform across all sources.
Not at all. And the third huge caveat, which you can't just adjust away in a spreadsheet, is demography. China's workforce has been shrinking for years now.
Tens of millions fewer workers since the mid-2010s, right?
That's the scale. So TFP has to improve dramatically real, genuine innovation just to counteract that demographic drag on potential growth. It needs to run faster just to stay still, in a way.
Which might explain policy discussions about things like raising the retirement age.
It's all connected. So the fair read for you, the listener, is yes, the policy focus on innovation is real. And yes, PWT 11.0 now presents a more upbeat TFP trend. But that trend is partly down to measurement choices and partly reflects genuine progress in some areas. We have to look at multiple data sources.
Okay, so the inspiration story is complex, tangled up with data choices. What about the reaction to pressure story? That seems more straightforward, maybe even more dramatic.
It certainly feels that way. The turning point seems to be around 7 years ago, right when the U.S.-China trade tensions really started heating up.
Wow.
There was this unusual series of articles, apparently from a central government ministry, 35 pieces titled, "What is Choking Us?" It was a systematic effort to identify technological weak spots.
35 articles mapping out vulnerabilities. That sounds like a serious moment of introspection.
Absolutely. It suggests a realization that this wasn't just going to be about tariffs on everyday goods. A real contest would be about technology, about critical dependencies, about, well, choke points. It looks like they learned from Washington's playbook, frankly.
And their response wasn't just defensive tariffs. They started using other tools, right?
Yes, they diversified their toolkit.
Yeah.
We saw shifts in where they bought commodities, buying more soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, for instance, which directly impacted U.S. farmers, a key political group.
Clever, hitting specific constituencies.
And they also ramped up regulatory pressure. Things like antitrust investigations, targeting big Western tech and chemical firms. Google, DuPont, NVIDIA, Qualcomm seemed to increase as tensions rose.
But the biggest move, arguably, was mirroring the U.S. strategy on export controls.
Definitely the most consequential. They essentially built their own sophisticated system to control the export of key technologies and materials. It's quite the turnaround using the competitors' own preferred tools against them. We saw a striking example last December. The U.S. announced new chip restrictions, and literally within a day, Beijing hit back with controls on gallium, germanium, and antimony.
Metals critical for high-tech manufacturing, semiconductors, things like that.
Precisely. It showed they had this mechanism ready to deploy very quickly.
And the ultimate choke point everyone talks about is rare earths.
That's the classic example. China dominates mining, but crucially has near total dominance in the complex refining process for these 17 elements. They're essential for everything from electric vehicle motors and wind turbines to advanced electronics and defense systems.
And they've recently tightened the screws there, too.
They have. Last October, they rolled out a much stricter licensing system. It covers not just the rare earth elements themselves and related tech, but, and this is a significant expansion, it explicitly includes the technologies and production methods for lithium-ion batteries.
Wow, including battery tech. That feels like a major escalation beyond just controlling the raw materials.
It absolutely is. It signals a shift from just controlling scarcity to actively trying to influence where advanced manufacturing happens globally. They're leveraging their massive manufacturing scale. Remember, China accounts for about 35% of global manufacturing output, roughly triple the U.S. share.
So the dependence runs deep. By 2020, U.S. manufacturers were already much more reliant on inputs from China than Chinese manufacturers were on inputs in the U.S.
Exactly. That structural imbalance gives China significant near-term leverage, especially with rare earths. The U.S. has, what, one active mine and very little refining capacity. Building new mines and refineries takes years and billions of dollars.
So that window of asymmetry where China holds the cards on rare earths is wide open right now.
It is. But wielding that power isn't risk-free for Beijing.
How so? What are the downsides for them?
Well, a couple of big ones. First, diplomatic risk. If they overuse these controls too aggressively, they risk pushing other countries not even directly involved in the U.S.-China spat towards Washington. It could accelerate efforts by third parties to de-risk their own supply chains away from China.
Alienating potential partners.
Right. And second, there's pure economic risk. These controls, if applied too broadly, could actually hurt Chinese exporters by disrupting global value chains they participate in or provoking retaliatory measures.
And let's not forget, the U.S. still holds some very strong cards in this game.
Absolutely. The U.S. still leads in critical areas, particularly at the very highest end of semiconductor technology, the most advanced chips below, say, 7 nanometers. And perhaps even more critical is ED software electronic design automation.
Explain that quickly.
It's the highly complex software needed to actually design all advanced semiconductors. It's a sector dominated by American firms. If you can't access the latest design tools, building cutting-edge chips becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
So control the design software and you control the future of chips, essentially.
It's a major bottleneck. But there's an even bigger constraint potentially facing Beijing.
Which is?
U.S. dominance in the global financial system, specifically the U.S. dollar. If things really escalated, the U.S. could impose severe sanctions on major Chinese banks.
Not just small regional ones, but the big players.
Exactly. Cutting them off from the dollar system, possibly limiting their access to SWIFT for international payments, that would be a massive shock. It could seriously disrupt China's ability to conduct international trade, which is fundamental to its economy.
Okay, so there are external checks and balances. What about the internal picture in China?
Yeah.
This push for self-reliance, for inspiration-led growth, does it come at a domestic cost?
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge, often overlooked domestic trade-off. Pouring vast sums of money into subsidizing domestic chip factories or building up massive stockpiles of strategic materials that capital has to come from somewhere.
Right, it's not free money.
It's money that could potentially be spent on other things, like strengthening social safety nets, boosting underfunded pensions, or improving local healthcare services, things that directly impact household consumption and well-being.
So there's a direct competition for resources between funding technological resilience and funding, say, immediate consumer welfare.
That's the inherent tension. The leadership is clearly prioritizing long-term strategic resilience and tech self-sufficiency right now. But politically, standing firm against perceived external pressure, particularly from the U.S., plays very well domestically.
So the rally around the flag effect helps maintain support for this strategy, even with domestic economic challenges like the property slump or weak inflation.
It certainly seems to be part of the political calculation, yes. It helps consolidate support even when other parts of the economy are struggling.
Okay, this all sets a complex backdrop for this potential meeting we're hearing about between the Chinese leader and Mr. Trump in South Korea next week. Given everything we've discussed, the data nuances, the leverage plays, the risks, what's a realistic expectation?
Well, the consensus among analysts seems to be keep expectations very low. The goal is likely risk management, not some kind of breakthrough or grand bargain.
So forget about big announcements on tariffs being slashed or huge new Chinese investments in the U.S.
That seems highly unlikely. The focus will probably be on preventing further escalation, maybe putting some guardrails in place.
What might that look like practically? Modest steps.
Possibly. Maybe an agreement that existing tariffs stay, but no new ones are added. Perhaps both sides could agree to clarify or slightly narrow the scope of some export controls, maybe through specific exemptions, just to provide a bit more predictability for businesses.
And maybe a symbolic gesture.
China resuming purchases of U.S. soybeans is often mentioned. It's something tangible, logistically easy for China to do, and politically popular with Mr. Trump's base. A small confidence builder.
Okay, so managing risks, not solving underlying conflicts. What about the longer-term picture then? Where does this strategic competition go?
In the long run, the U.S. strategy seems to rely heavily on allied scale, working with partners like the G7 nations, India, and others to create an economic and technological bloc whose aggregate capacity outweighs China's alone.
Pooling resources, essentially.
Yes. For China, the challenge remains that difficult balancing act. Continuing to fund the expensive drive for self-sufficiency while also finding ways to stimulate domestic demand, support consumption, and manage those internal economic pressures and trade-offs we talked about.
Which brings us nicely to a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. If the ultimate goal of this long economic contest isn't really about old-school military dominance, but more about achieving national resilience and self-sufficiency, how long can the domestic costs of pursuing that inspiration-led growth, the subsidies, the redirected resources, be sustained before they start to outweigh the perceived benefits of having that external economic leverage?
That's a crucial question. Balancing those internal costs against external strategic goals will likely define China's path for years to come.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.